So tonight we're going to talk about the word ekklesia. It's a Greek word. It's a subject that will more than likely ruffle a few feathers from the choir loft all the way down to the fellowship hall. And before anyone can holler heresy or go grab your pastor like he's your emotional security blanket, let me give you a fair warning. If you're addicted to church buildings, if you think your pastor is Moshe 2.0, if you treat religion like a warm biscuit on Sunday morning, then what you're about to hear is going to feel like a bee's nest sitting in your lap. Perhaps, perhaps not. Because we're not talking about the word church. We're talking about ekklesia. E-K-K-L-E-S-I-A in the Greek. The word Yahusha used. The word Rome buried. And the word Christianity replaced with drywall, stained glass, and coffee bars. Now, not including this building. Because on the front it says Trumpets of Yahweh. It doesn't say Trumpets of Yahweh Church. And one time I think it said ministries, if I remember right. So tighten your belts. This isn't Sunday school. To coin a phrase, this is where the truth gets its boots on. The word they didn't want people to know. So ekklesia in the King James is translated as either assembly or church. In the NASB, it's also translated as church, assembly, or congregation. The origin of the word ekklesia is a compound word from the Greek word ex, which is G1537, and a derivative of G2564, kaleo. Kaleo means called. The other Greek word ex is among. So if you look at ekklesia, it means properly a calling out, a calling among. Concretely, a called out assembly of citizens, specifically of Yahusha, the community of the redeemed of Yahusha, whether being on earth or in heaven or both. Used only of people, not a location, structure, etc. The simplest meaning of that word is this: the called out ones. Not called into pews, not called into denominations, not called into rituals, not called into Rome's little religious empire. No, no, and no again. Yahusha called us out. Called us out, ekklesia, out of the synagogue system, out of Pharisee politics, out of the traditions of men, out of the lies they dress up in Sunday best. But Rome, oh, they couldn't have any of that. Called out ones don't tithe. Called out ones don't kneel to bishops. Called out ones don't salute popes. Called out ones don't care about the Vatican's electric bill. So Rome said, let's change it to church. A building, a system, something we can control. And Christianity said, yes, sir, Father Constantine, whatever you say. The verses where Yahusha dropped the truth. So if you were to go to Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. And we'll start, there's 3 different readings here I'm going to do. One is from the King James, the other is from the Sefer, and the other is from the Scriptures. Starting with the King James, Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. And I say also unto thee, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. The Sefer. And I say also unto you, that you are Kepha, and upon this rock I will rebuild my called out assembly, and the gates of Sheol shall not prevail against it. How many of you out there have the Scriptures? And this is the next reading from the Scriptures. And I also say to you that you are Kepha, and on this rock I shall build my assembly, and the gates of Sheol shall not overcome it. So in the King James, they translated the word Ekklesia to church, and in the Scriptures, they translate it to assembly. The word is Ekklesia, not church. Yahusha didn't say, I'll build me a Baptist church, a Methodist wing, and a Catholic empire. He said, my Ekklesia, my called out ones, not called into buildings, not called into systems, but called out of systems. Matthew chapter 18, verse 17. This is where he says, tell it to the Ekklesia. The King James first. And if he shall neglect to hear them, tell it unto the church. But if he neglect to hear the church, let him be unto thee as a heathen man and a publican. The Sefer. And if he shall neglect to hear them, tell it unto the called out assembly. But if he neglect to hear the called out assembly, let him be unto you as a heathen man and a publican. The Scriptures. And if he refuses to hear them, say it to the assembly. And if he refuses even to hear the assembly, let him be to you like the nations and a tax collector. Well, that's interesting. I didn't know publican meant tax collector, but I guess it does. Again, Ekklesia, not church. You don't tell it to the building. You don't tell it to the denomination. And you don't tell it to a pulpit with a fog machine. You tell it to the remnant who walk in truth. Yahusha's obedient ones. One more verse from Matthew. Chapter 18, verse 20. Where he says, where 2 or 3 are gathered. Reading from the King James first. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. Sefer. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. The Scriptures. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am in their midst. So you see, all 3 translations are pretty much the same. But what does that all mean? The discernment of this is, we are gathered in His name, not gathered into a 501c3. Gathered in His Torah, not gathered to a bullet point sermon. Gathered under Yahweh, not gathered under some apostle worshiping doctrine. Yahusha defined Ekklesia right there, where 2 or 3 in truth outweigh 1,000 in religion. So how did church become the translation for Ekklesia? What we have here is a bit of a twisted tale. So we start way back in the 5th century, where the Cappadocian Christians who resided at the time in central Turkey, their communities were called, and this is Greek, Kyriakos Oikos, meaning the Lord's house. So it is spelled Kyriakos, and then Oikos. Kyriakos Oikos. They had a major influence on the translation of the Bible into Gothic, an Old East Germanic language. The Goths renamed Kyriakos Oikos as Cyric, C-I-R-I-C. In Old English, that became Kirk, K-E-R-K. And in the present day English, church. And in German, Kirche, K-I-R-C-H-E. There's one more anomaly in this tale. In the King James translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, the translators consistently employed the word assembly, while in the New Testament they used the word church. Thus, they obscured the connection of the New Testament to the Old Testament and its Hebraic roots. It's assembly over in the Old, church in the New Testament. Why they replaced Ekklesia with church? Well now, isn't that convenient? A word that means called out suddenly gets swapped out for a word that means come inside and obey your overseers. Why, that sounds like the kind of switcheroo only a government or a megachurch could dream up. Ekklesia threatens power. Church protects power. Ekklesia walks in truth. Church walks in tradition. Ekklesia answers to Yahweh. Church answers to Rome, the state, and the donors. Ekklesia is a body. Church is a business. One follows the shepherd. The other follows a salary. Part 4, the scandal of the century. Every pastor hollers, "Get to church." But Yahusha said, "Get out of her, my people." Every Christian says, "I go to church." But Yahusha said, "Follow me." Every religion says, "Join our building." But Yahusha said, "Walk the narrow path." You want to know the truth? Most churches today would hate the real Ekklesia because the real Ekklesia would expose them. And that's why they never teach this word. So in closing, I'm going to mix some of the Father's wisdom with straight Scripture truth. 1. You cannot be part of Yahushua's Ekklesia while sitting comfortably in the very system he called you out of. You cannot follow the narrow road if your pastor is still waving you toward the wide gate because it fills the seats. You can't walk in truth while being spoon-fed doctrines that were imported from Rome like cheap furniture. Ekklesia is not a location. It's not a service. It's not a sermon. It's not a Sunday routine. It's a calling out of Babylon, out of religion, out of lies, out of men's authority, but into the Father Yahweh's authority. And once you hear that call, once you see that the word really meant, once you recognize that Yahushua never built a church, you'll never sit comfortably in a pew again. Not one more Sunday, not one more sermon, not one more lie. Because the Ekklesia, the called out assembly, is not in the building. The Ekklesia walks away from the building. And that, my friend, is why the world fears it, and why Yahushua said he would build his called out assembly. So concludes my teaching lesson for tonight.